You should be in the class. So, good afternoon. So I think it's better to start. Okay. So, this is the third session. I will talk about the hearing in this one, and in the next one, today, I will talk about taste, smell, and equilibrium. So hearing in this part and other parts of the special senses in the next session. Okay, so the auditory system or the hearing system deals with sounds. So it can detect sounds, so we can hear that. Sounds are pressure waves that are generated by vibrating air molecules, right? So when we have a vibrating tuning fork, so the fork goes back and forth. Every time that it goes ahead, it presses air molecules here, and it makes the air molecules behind the fork looser. So here in this part, air molecules are relaxed, but here in front, air molecules are dense. So we have condensation here, rarefaction here. Rarefaction means they are separated and get relaxed, but condensation means they become tighter. So pressure here increases, but here decreases, right? If we only consider this part, and measure the pressure, in some phase pressure is high, in other phase pressure is low. So if we plot this, we'll see a wave like this, right? Sometimes the pressure here is high, some other time the pressure will become very low. So the pressure oscillates from a peak to a trough. So we have peak here and trough here. Trough means very down, right? So then we have a pressure wave like this. So this is the time, this is the changes of the pressure. So alternate phases of condensation and rarefaction of the molecules is called sound, right? Sound waves have four major features. The first one is waveform. So the waveform for this one is a sinusoidal one, right? Maybe we have something else. For example, we may have something like this. Okay, so the waveform is different. So we can see a waveform like this in a musical tract or a piece of music, right? So, for example, waves that we hear in a music may have a specific pattern, which is different from the sinusoidal one. But the sound that we hear in our voice, in a speech, is a very complex one. So we may have a very complex pattern of the wave like this. Okay? So not all sounds have a pattern like this. This is only for pure tones. So we call this pure tone. Like a beep. Okay? Beep. Okay? So this is a pure tone. It doesn't change, and it's a sinusoidal wave. Okay? But the pattern of sound can be different. So one feature of a sound is waveform. So the amplitude, which is plotted against the time. Another one is the phase. Phase means For example, here we have peak, here we have trough. Maybe we have another wave that has a reverse pattern. For example, we may have this wave. So they are anti-phase. So the peak phase of this corresponds to the trough of this. Right? So they are anti-phase. So the second feature of any sound is phase. The third one is amplitude. So amplitude is this one. Right? The changes that happens in the pressure. So the peak to the trough. So we call this amplitude. And the fourth one is the frequency. Frequency means the number of these peaks in a unit time. So if we have, for example, 1 second here, and the sound oscillates, for example, this time, okay? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hertz. Right? So this is the frequency. The frequency of the sound corresponds to the pitch. So the pitch of the voice corresponds to the frequency of the sound. Pitch like a bass one or a timbre one. So bass like the voice of a man, and timbre like the voice of a woman. Right? So the frequency is different, pitch is different, but amplitude corresponds to the loudness. When the amplitude is high, the sound is very loud. When the amplitude is low, the sound is very weak. Okay, the intensity is low. So, sound waves travel through the air at a speed of around 344 meters per second. So in the air, they go very fast at a speed of 344 meters per second. Okay. Now, when we want to compare two sounds, right, we can use a measurement called decibel. So, decibel is defined as 20 times logarithm of pressure of the sound to the pressure of the reference sound. So imagine that we have a sound number 1, and we want to compare this one with another sound which is the reference. So we have sound 0 or reference sound, right? So it has a pressure, this one has also a pressure. So we can put the pressure here, and then we can compare the difference of these two sound pressures, right? So we can express it in the unit of decibel, right? So let's have an example. Usually the reference sound has a pressure of about 0.0002 dyne per square centimeter, right? So now imagine that we have a sound which is 10 times louder, 10 times more amplitude, right? So it will be 0.002, right? So decibel means 20 times logarithm of this one, this one, okay, to the pressure of this one. So the difference is 10 times, right? So logarithm of 10 equals 1 times 20. Yeah, it will give us a 20 decibel. So 20 decibel means there is 10 times difference between two sounds. One of them is 10 times more louder than the second one, right? So the reference one. So usually we can use this reference, and we call that standard sound reference. Standard sound reference. But we can put everything here. We may have sound number 1, sound number 2, one of them is reference, so we can compare the difference, right? So now, for a sound that is 10 times greater than the reference, decibel is 20. For a sound that is 100-fold more or low, decibel is 40 decibel, the difference, right? When the difference is 1,000-fold, then it's 60 decibel, right? So you can predict a sound that is 10,000 times different, decibel will be 8, right? 100,000, 100, right? 1 million times more, no, 120, right? So the logarithm of this is 6 times 20 become 120. What about decibel 0? So 0 decibel means that the sound of the interest has exactly the same pressure of the reference sound. Right? So it doesn't mean that there is no sound. It means that the sound that we are talking about has the same pressure of the reference sound. Right? So, now, let's go here and talk about the hearing ability of human auditory nervous system. So the audible frequencies to human include this range, 20 Hertz to 20,000 Hertz. Or we can say 20 Hertz to 20 kilohertz. So this is the range of the sound that we can hear. So compare this with the wavelength of the light. I told you that the visible light, 400 nanometer, not hertz. To 700 nanometers, wavelength. This is different from frequency. But we can convert it to the frequency. But it's very narrow, right? But this one is very wide and broad, right? But as we get older and older, this range decreases. So in elderly, the range of audible frequencies are from 50 to 8,000 hertz. So you can see that there is very sharp decrease in the high frequency range. Instead of 20,000, the person can hear 8,000 hertz. Right? The greatest sensitivity happens in this range, 1,000 to 4,000. And the best one is 3,000. Right? So a 3,000 hertz sound can be heard even when its intensity is about 70 decibel below 1 dial squared centimeter sound pressure level. So what does it mean? It means if we take this one as a reference, okay? So instead of 0.0002 dial square centimeter, instead of this, we use this one. right? So reference will be here. So a sound with this pressure has a decibel of 0, right? Now, at this hertz, 2000 hertz. The greatest sensitivity happens here, which means the lowest amplitude of the sound. And it corresponds to minus 70. So 70 decibel below this, right? If the sound has a frequency of 2000, if it has a frequency of 10 hertz, 100 hertz, then it will have a decibel of about minus 30, right? So it's okay also. But for example, at 10,000 hertz, it's here and it's about minus 40 decibel, right? So which one has the best one? This frequency, 2000 or 1000 to 4000 hertz, right? So we have the greatest sensitivity of hearing at this frequency, which has a decibel of minus 70 decibel. You got this? Or you need more thinking? Okay. So now let's see the auditory system. We know that we have external ear, we have middle ear, we have inner ear or internal, right? So the middle ear is located here between the tympanic membrane and oval window, and we have ossicles. Inside this cavity we have air, right? And we have ossicles. So let's see the ossicles. The first one is malleus, second one is incus, the third one is stapes. Stapes is in front of the oval window, right? In the inner ear we have vestibular apparatus and cochlea. The cochlea is the main organ for hearing. Vestibular apparatus is the main organ for equilibrium and balance, right? Okay, there are also two muscles here. The first one is tensor tympani, second one stapedius. So this one is connected to the handle of the malleus, so it pulls the malleus inward, right? But this one, stapedius, is connected to the stapes, so it pulls the stapes inward, outward, right? So this one is innervated by nerve number... No, this one, tensor tympani. Okay, the branch of which nerve? Trigeminal. So trigeminal nerve innervates this one, but facial nerve innervates this one, right? Okay, so let's see here that in the vestibular apparatus we have 3 semicircular channels and 2 enlargements that are called utricle and saccules, right? So now let me talk about the middle ear, which is composed of ossicles and tympanic membrane, right? So we know that when a sound wave actually travels through the air, it has a very high speed, 344 meters per second, right? And it has high energy. But when it reaches, for example, a liquid like water, when it enters the liquid, 99% of the energy is lost. Only about 1% remains. Why this happens? Because the impedance of the air is very lower than the impedance of the water. Impedance means resistance for traveling, resistance for passage, right? So impedance in the air is very low, impedance in the liquid is very high. So that's why we have 99% decrease in the energy, right? So the function of the oscillator system is impedance matching, means it matches the impedance of the air with the impedance of the liquid. Why we are talking about the liquid? Because in the inner ear we have liquid. Yeah, pre-lip and end-lip, right? And the sound should go into that liquid. If it goes directly, 99% of the energy is lost and we cannot hear anything, right? So we should match the impedance of the air with the impedance of the liquid, right? So impedance is the resistance of a medium to movement. So the main function of the middle ear is impedance matching. Impedance matching, I will talk about the mechanism, but let's see the significance first. Impedance matching is between 50% to 75% perfect for some sounds. Sounds that have a frequency between 300 to 3 hertz. So this range actually covers the range of frequencies that we hear in a speech. So when we talk, we usually use sounds that have frequencies between 300 to 3000. Okay? And this range is a very essential range for us. And impedance matching is best for this range. Right? So this way we can say that the oscillator system can increase the energy of the sound that are necessary for a speech. Right? So, if there is any problem in the oscillator system, impedance matching is lost, the patient will be deaf. There will be actually a hearing loss. This hearing loss is called conductive hearing loss. Conductive hearing loss. This means the oscillator system doesn't working or is not working properly. It doesn't do impedance matching. So energy of the sound is lost. So sounds are usually heard 15 to 20 decibel smaller. Right? So now let's see how the oscillator system does the impedance matching.
10 to 75% represent what? The resistance to...
This one you mean?
Yes.
No, impedance matching. Impedance matching is not perfect, so it cannot totally compensate for this loss, but it can compensate for 50% of the energy which is lost. Okay? Okay, how this happens? So, impedance matching happens because of two principles. So, impedance matching happens because of two principles. The first one is called hydraulic principle. Hydraulic. The second one is called lever principle. So, hydraulic principle is like this. We have tympanic membrane. The area is about 55 square millimeter, right? But oval window has an area of 3.2 square millimeter. So energy is collected from a large area and it's focused onto a smaller area. So we have focusing of the energy. right? So the pressure increases. How much increase? 17, right? So 55 divided by 3.2 is about 50. So the second one is called lever principle. We know that okay, how can we move? Click on the eye,
Yes.
then the eye can move?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Oh. Okay, so let me bring it here. Okay. So the lever principle is like this. The handle of the malleus is longer than the incus. So it provides us with a lever principle or a lever action. So you know lever, right? So for example, you want to move this heavy object. Maybe you can't, but you can use a lever. Right? So if you press this one, you can easily move this object. Why? Because the length of this part is more than the length of this part. So by levering action, you can move the object, right? So the same also happens here because the length of the malleus is longer than the length of the incus, right? So the ratio is 1.3. So 17 times 1.3 is 22. So we have 22-fold increase in the energy of the sound. So before the sound reaches the liquid, there is 22 times increase in the energy. Then 99% is lost. The remaining part is a remarkable part. So it can change the liquid inside the internal ear. Right? So this is called impedance matching. So now I can, yeah, this one I can move, right? Good. Okay, again, this slide I can fix. Good. So the first function of the ossicular system is impedance matching. But there are also other functions. So the second function is to protect the inner ear from damage. How this happens? By a reflex called attenuation reflex. So attenuation reflex is like this. When we hear a very loud sound which is damaging, there will be reflex contraction of the stapedius and tensor tympani. So tensor tympani pulls the malleus inward, stapedius pulls the stapes outward. So ossicles move like this. So they become very rigid and stiff. Sound come to the ear, it cannot move the ossicles because the ossicles are very rigid and stiff. So ossicles don't conduct the sound to the internal ear. So the internal ear is protected against the loud sound. Right? So we call this attenuation reflex. Attenuation reflex needs about 40 to 80 milliseconds to work. If the sound is very sudden and transient, it can damage the inner ear. But if it's longer, and if it takes longer, then this reflex can work and it can decrease conduction to the internal ear. This way it can protect the ear. Right? So there is also another function for ossicular system, and it's contraction of these muscles when we talk. right? So during the speech, these muscles contract, so they make the ossicular system rigid, so we can hear our sound at a lower rate. So this can mask our own sound, right? So when we talk, we don't hear our sound so much, right? So this is the third function. So what happens if there is any problem with this reflex, right? Yeah, middle ear, no, inner ear. Okay, so if there is problem with the ossicular system, or when there is any problem in this reflex and the muscles don't contract, then loud sound can go through the ossicular system to the inner ear, and it can damage the inner ear, right? One example is Bell's palsy. You know that. Which nerve is affected in this palsy? Facial nerve. Very good. Number 7. Which muscle? Stapedius. So stapedius doesn't work good, right? So when we hear a loud sound, it doesn't contract. So the ossicular system can carry the sound directly into the inner ear. So it can be damaging. Or in this patient, even moderate sounds are painful, right? So when they hear low or moderate sounds, it's very painful for these patients. So we call this hyperacusis. So hyperacusis is a problem that happens, when there is a problem in stapedius muscle. Okay. What? Yeah, they should work together. Yeah, when one of them is not working, the whole system doesn't work, actually, right? Okay, yeah. Yeah, but the amplitude decreases. Yeah, we can hear other voices better, right? Because when we talk consciously, so there is a decrease in the level of the sound, our sound actually, right? So sometimes you can record your voice and listen to it. Okay, you can understand that the quality of the sound is different from that you hear when you talk. You know? Okay. So I told you that the resistance for movement, or the resistance against the movement in air is different from liquid. And the cochlea is located inside the bone, right? So the impedance of bone is similar to the impedance of liquid. So inside the inner ear we have liquid. So if the sound goes through the bone, it can go directly into the liquid, and there is no loss of energy, right? So the impedance of bone is similar to the impedance of liquid, so there is no energy loss when the sound goes through the bone into the liquid. Yeah, but if the sound comes from the air and then hits the bone, there is again 99% decrease, right? So we can use this principle. Okay, we can use a tuning fork, which is vibrating, and put this on the bone, and we can send the sound directly to the bone, so there is no loss of energy, right? And then it can go directly from the bone into the liquid. right? So there is no need for impedance matching. I told you, because the impedance of the bone and soft tissue is similar to the impedance of the liquid. Okay, the impedance means resistance against movement of the sound, right? So naturally, the impedance of bone, soft tissue, and liquid are the same. But the impedance of these relative to air is very high, right? So if the sound is able to enter the bone and go through the bone, it means there is no problem for passaging or passing into the liquid. There is no loss. Okay? But if the sound goes from the air to the bone, again, 99% is liquid. Right? Because the impedance is different. So, we can use this for examination of a patient. We can vibrate a tuning fork, put it on the bone, so the sound goes directly into the bone. From the bone, it can go into the liquid. So then we can ask the patient if he or she can hear the sound. Right? If the patient is able to hear the sound, it means there is no problem in the inner ear. Yeah, maybe there is a problem in middle ear. So we call this conductive sensory loss. But if the patient is not able to hear the sound, this means there is a problem in the inner ear. Maybe in hair cells, maybe in fibers, maybe in the CNS. Right? So it's different from the conductive hearing loss. So we call that sensory neural hearing loss. So we may have conductive problem or sensory neural hearing loss. Right? Yeah, I have this here. Sensory neural hearing loss. So if there is problem in the hair cells or auditory nerve, so this is this type, sensory neuron, but if there is problem in the ossicles, it's different, conductive hearing loss. Everything is clear? So did you get anything? Everything? No? Yes. Okay. Now, let's talk about the cochlea. I told you that the main organ for hearing in the inner ear is cochlea. So cochlea is like a snail, right? Like a spiral. So we have a bone called medullus, right? So medullus, and the cochlea turn around medullus, right? So if we cut this, we can see something like this. Okay? Yeah, like this. Okay? So we'll see that this tube is turning this way. Okay? So it turns like this. If we cut like this, yeah, we'll see this one. Got it? Good. So you can see that it's innervated by fibers of the cranial nerve number 8, right? We have a spiral ganglion here, which is the cell body of these fibers, right? So now, I told you that the cochlea turn around the medullus, right? So now let's uncoil it and open it. So it would be like this, right? On one side we have oval window, which is located here at the base. On the other side, we have helicotrema, which is located at the apex. So the snail is like this. It has a base and a space and a space. Apex, right? So a base and apex, yeah. So the apex is near the helicotrema, but base is near the oval window, right? So if we consider this tube, it has three compartments. On the top we have scala vestibuli, in the middle we have scala media, and below we have scala tympani. So scala tympani, scala media, scala vestibuli. You know that in the scala tympani and scala vestibuli, we have a fluid called prelim. Right? But in a scala media, yeah, we have endoliths. So scala media is separated from the scala vestibuli by Reissner membrane, and scala tympani is separated from scala media by basilar membrane. So basilar membrane separates the scala tympani from media, but Reissner membrane separates the scala media from the scala vestibuli. So, continue? Okay. The Reissner membrane is very loose, right? So it's very loose and soft. So it doesn't do anything with the sound, right? So the sound can easily go through this Reissner membrane. So we can ignore that, right? So in physiology, we can ignore this one, and we can consider a scala vestibuli and a scala media together. So here you can see that we have basilar membrane. Above the membrane we have a scala vestibuli and a scala media. Below the membrane we have scala tympani. Basilar membrane, yeah. So the basilar membrane remains, but we can ignore Reissner membrane. Okay. So I think that why you talk? Why you all talk? So scientific discussion. What is that? Genetic. It's not related to physiology. Okay. So we have basilar membrane. On the top we have a scala vestibuli, scala media together. Down to it or below it we have a scala tympani, right? So now let's focus on basilar membrane. You can see that it's composed of some fibers, right? So now let me talk about these fibers. So the basilar membrane is composed of fibers. These fibers are small and short near the oval window, but they are longer at helicotrema, apex, right? So when we go from base to the apex, the length of these fibers increases. From the base to apex. From the base to apex, the size or the length increases. In the base, short. In the apex, long. Okay? So, thickness. The thickness of the fiber is very high at the base, but is thin at the apex. So when we go from the base to the apex, length increases, thickness decreases. Right? So we'll have short and thick fibers. At the base, we have long and thin fibers, apex. Right? So the length increases from 0.04 millimeter to 0.5 millimeter. So 12 times increase. The diameter decreases. Stiffness decreases. So they are very stiff, but these are very loose. Okay? So they are flexible, but they are very stiff and strong. Clear? No? Yeah? Finished? Okay. Okay. Now, let's see the basilar membrane again. Base, apex. You can see that the fibers are short here and long here, so the base is narrower, apex is wider. Right? Fibers are stiff here, are loose and flexible here. So, we know that a fiber can vibrate, right? So